Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. Tonight, we're joined by founder of the Walkaway Movement, Brandon Straka. He's a friend to the show. He's been on with us before. Brandon, welcome back. A lot has happened since the last time you joined us on the show. For people that might not be totally familiar with you, maybe they saw you in the viral video that you posted originally. It turned into starting the walkaway movement, and basically that worked to help disenfranchised Democrats walk away from the party that they thought supported them. Tell people a little bit about you, why you left the Democrat Party, and sort of how the walkaway movement founded before we really get into the thick of things here.
Sure. So my backstory is essentially that I was a lifelong liberal, a two-time Obama voter. I actually voted for Hillary in 2016, which maybe I'm paying penance for that right now. Maybe that's what's going on.
Oh, no.
But and when Donald Trump got elected in 2016, I had like a total breakdown, like so many liberals did. The difference is I eventually overcame my breakdown. But the way I overcame my breakdown was by trying to understand two things. Number one, how did the media that I had trusted my whole life, sources like CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Huffington Post, Vice, etc., how did they get it so wrong? Because they kept assuring me that Hillary Clinton was going to win in a landslide and that Donald Trump had, a 3% chance of winning, which obviously is not what happened. But the other thing was that the media that I trusted had spent about a year and a half convincing me that Donald Trump was a racist and a bigot and a homophobe and a deplorable human being, and so were all of his followers. And so I had two kind of searing questions in my mind. Number one, why would anyone ever vote for such a man? Number two, how did the media that I trusted get it so wrong? And so that kind of sent me on this journey of research, which went on throughout most of 2017. And really opened my eyes to the fact that the media that I had been trusting was so dishonest and duplicitous and manipulative and exploitative, and that Donald Trump wasn't my problem. The media that I trusted was my problem. And I guess the other factor that really ties into this so much is that I'm a gay man. And if you're a minority in America, Black, brown, LGBT, religious minority, a woman, that the news that we receive is being sort of filtered through that exploitative, manipulative filter that tells us that, the Republicans are out to get you, conservatives are out to get you, you're in danger, your rights are in danger. And I mean, nothing could be more evident, I think, of that right now than what's happening in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill, which is not a Don't Say Gay bill, but that's just one example of what they do.
Yeah. And so I think I first saw you, I think, on a Fox interview that you did. And your story I found really interesting. And you laid it out, obviously, so well. You're so well spoken. And I think that's why so many people really wanted to listen to what you had to say, because you lay it out so perfectly, Brandon. There was this huge disconnect between what folks in the mainstream media were telling all of us in 2016 and what actually happened. The way they portrayed Donald Trump and all of his supporters and who we all actually are and who my father-in-law actually is. And so I first saw you there. Obviously, you and I kind of had a connection because of that. You were very generous with your time. You did a lot on shows that I've done in the past, and I was so excited to get to know you. I participated in some events with you along the way. And I got to tell you, the walkaway movement, for people that maybe you've heard of it but don't know about it, it was a huge deal. And I was stunned, honestly, by the amount of people that turned out to these events. Tell people a little bit about Walkaway.
Sure. So after I kind of had this epiphany, after doing this journey of research in 2017, I ended up walking away from the Democratic Party, from the ideology of liberalism, and from the liberal media. And if I were a heterosexual white man, I probably would have just left it at that, and that would have been the end of it. I really actually think it's the fact that I belong to a minority community that caused this sense of like outrage inside of me, because it's bad enough that the media is so dishonest and they are so manipulative, but when you look at the ways in which they're manipulating the fear and the concerns of minority people, the Black community, Hispanic community, LGBT community. To me, that's really unconscionable. And that's what kind of pushed me over the edge of wanting to actually do something about it and speak out. So as you mentioned earlier, I created a video in 2018 in which I just laid out basically in 6 minutes all of the reasons why I was walking away from liberalism, Democratic Party, and the liberal media. And I started a Facebook group called the #WalkAway campaign, and basically encouraged anyone else who was feeling the same way I was feeling to create their own video and written testimonials. And, I had no idea whether it would work or not. I had a pretty good gut instinct that there were probably a lot of people who were feeling like I was feeling, but were just sort of waiting for someone else to say it first or open that door to say, yeah, this is a safe place where you can express how you're feeling. But I don't even know if I could have imagined, the explosion that came next, because literally within like 2 months, we had tens and tens of thousands of people who were creating videos and creating written testimonials. And then, as you mentioned, I started getting the attention of Fox News about 6 weeks after I started Walkaway. And in 1 week, I was on Tucker Carlson's show, Laura Ingraham's show, Judge Jeaninine's show, Fox and Friends, Charles Payne. And then at that point, we went from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. And unfortunately, this was all happening on Facebook, and Facebook banned the Walkaway campaign in January January of 2021. And at that point, we had 510,000 people who had joined the movement on Facebook.
Wow. I mean, does it shock you, Brandon, that there's not a Walkaway campaign for Republicans that have left the Republican Party and moved to the Democrat Party? Like that's unheard of, right? Because
they've tried.
Well, and what are there, like 3 people in that group? It's crazy. Yeah, exactly. Because so many of the things you said are just so spot on. But I think people now more so than ever in this very moment, with Joe Biden as president, with Democrats in charge of the House and Senate, and essentially running, the country by and large, Americans are now feeling exactly how bad it can get whenever you vote people into office, not because of their qualifications, but because they're a nice person, because of the way they look, identity politics, all this virtue signaling garbage. It gets you to where we are right now in America. It gets you high inflation, weakness on the world stage, Americans just feeling desperate and feeling like how much worse can it possibly get? And yet it is going to get worse. Our southern border being overrun, all of these sort of things that we're seeing happen now in honestly such a short span of time. But I always find it funny. People are going from one side to another. They're not going equally between the two parties. Everyone that I talk to who has been a former Democrat and has now said, well, my values are much more in line with conservatives, they say, and there are so many more of us out there, no one wants to talk about it, though. So I commend you. I think Walkaway is an incredible campaign. I'm sorry it got shut down in January of 2021, but that does bring us to sort of the reason I wanted to have you on today. And you and I, just for full disclosure, have known each other for a long time. We've stayed in touch. And I want you to have the ability now to sort of tell people what happened to you, because I think as so many people are aware, you, along with millions of other Americans, went to the January 6th rally in support of Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. Maybe take it from there and sort of tell us what happened that day and what has happened up until now, because your story is shocking, and it's a warning as to, I think, how bad it can get whenever those in power deem you to be on the wrong side of whatever it is that they don't like.
Sure. So I actually was scheduled to be a speaker at a permitted event at the Capitol on January 6th. I wasn't an organizer, but the plan, as I had always been told, days leading up to January 6th, was that there was going to be an event at the Ellipse. President Trump, along with a number of other people, would be speaking, that we would be marching from the Ellipse to the Capitol. And then at the Capitol, I would be one of, I think, 3 or 4 dozen people that were scheduled to speak at a secondary event that then took place at the Capitol. So nothing felt at all unusual to me when I was sitting there at the Ellipse watching the event. I watched President Trump speak, and at the end, he said, we're going to march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol. sounded right to me. It took me a very long time to be able to exit the Ellipse grounds because I had a really good seat. And so I was one of the last people to be able to leave. And so the march was already happening. People were already on their way to the Capitol. And I had hired security, my own security, that was escorting me from point A to point B. And they had told me, you can't do the march. There's too many people. Number one, you'll never get there on time because everyone's going to want to take pictures and talk and whatever. But also, it's a lot of people. It's not the safest thing in the world, just in terms of crowd size. And so they insisted that I take the DC Metro. So I got on the Metro. I was headed to the Capitol. And as I was approaching the Capitol stop, I began getting text messages on my phone from friends, work associates who were at home watching on television, and they were saying, we're hearing on the news that people are going inside the building. I didn't really know what that meant, but the first sort of thought that I had in my mind were images of so many times when left-wing protesters have gone into government buildings to shout or hold a sign or do something like that, and then they usually get dragged out, and the whole event lasts about 5 seconds. And I wondered if something like that was going on, but that sounded really unusual to me because I've been to so many right-wing protests over the years, and I get frustrated just trying to get right-wing people to get out of the house and hold a sign. So now that I'm hearing that people are going inside the building, I was like, this just sounds weird. That doesn't sound right to me. And so as I was approaching the Capitol grounds, and I want to make really clear in every interview that I'm doing, I'm saying this because this is a very important piece of context and nuance that's gotten lost in nearly every story that I've ever seen about January 6th. When people think about the violence and the chaos associated with that day, they're probably picturing in their minds images of people scaling walls, breaking windows, smoke bombs going off, things like that. To the best of my knowledge, those things happened exclusively on the west side of the building. If any of those things happened on the north, south, or east side, I have no awareness of that whatsoever. But I believe that almost entirely that happened just on the west side during a contained period of time. I was approaching from the east side of the building, and I began shooting a video after numerous people had told me that people were going inside. I thought to myself, well, if this is true, I want to document if something unusual is happening so I can show this to my followers later that I captured something that was going on. So I entered the east side grounds, and what's interesting about my video, if you look at it, is that there are literally zero police officers on the east side grounds as I'm entering. There are no barricades. There are no traffic cones. There's no tape. There's nobody standing there saying you're not allowed to be there. And in addition to that, there were thousands of people on the grounds. And honestly, just kind of milling about. I mean, there were people riding bikes. There were mothers pushing babies in strollers. There was nothing about the atmosphere that seemed chaotic or scary or anything like that. And so I continued forward on toward the stairs where there was a larger concentrated group of people. And as I approached in my video, you see a man at the top of the stairs holding his hat in his hand and shouting down to the people below, "They've opened the doors. They're letting us in. We're going inside. We're going inside." And at that point, I ascended the steps on the east side. It was a crowd of several hundred people at the top of the steps. So I held my camera fully above my head because there were taller people in front of me. There were flags in front of me. I couldn't see everything. But what I could see is that the two metal doors of the east side were wide open, and that some people were trying to make their way inside, and some people were just standing there filming. And I was one of the people standing there filming. I stood there for about 8 minutes. And after that 8 minutes, a man came outside of the building who I assume was a protester. He got on a bullhorn and he said, in some very colorful language, he said, "They've cleared Congress. Everyone has left the building. Turn around and clear out, clear out." At that moment, I turned around. I walked down the stairs. I stayed on the grounds for about 20 more minutes interviewing people. I shot 13 videos just doing kind of man on the street interviews. And I never went inside the building. I didn't get within 30, 35 feet of going inside of the building. I honestly didn't think much of it. I went back to my hotel room and I uploaded the video that I had shot to Twitter and, basically said, this is what I witnessed today at the Capitol. And then about an hour or two after that, I turned on my television and I began to see images on the news of things that had happened on the west side of the building, the opposite side of the building that I was on. And I was really shocked. I was like, what is this? Where is this happening? It was shocking. And so I quickly became aware that whatever had gone on at the Capitol on that side of the building, something bigger happened than what I had experienced. And so I immediately took my video down. I took down all of the tweets I'd put out that day because I just thought, I don't know what occurred. And I didn't think another thing of it until 2.5 weeks later, on the morning of Monday, January 25th, an FBI SWAT team came into my house at the crack of dawn, got me out of bed, put me in handcuffs, and dragged me off to jail and told me that I was facing multiple felony charges for what I had done at the Capitol. And that began a year-long nightmare. Well, we're now into 16 months of nightmare that has torn my life to shreds.
Wow. Well, first of all, I think your experience and what happened with you that day, first of all, you were permitted to be on the steps, so you had every right to be there. You were supposed to be there, and you were approved to be there. You never went inside, nothing, you never hurt anyone, nothing else ever really happened other than you shooting some videos. But your description of sort of what you saw, I think, is probably what most people who were in Washington, D.C. in support of Donald Trump on January 6th sort of experienced themselves. The vast majority, it would seem to me, of people and this is from, I was there that day for a short period of time. I was not at the Capitol, but these were, peaceful people. They were people that loved America, that loved Donald Trump, felt like something was off in the election. They wanted to go and show their support for him. And I don't think most of the people there that day had any intention of what happened at the Capitol on January 6th happening, right? That was not anyone's goal, nor was it your goal. And I think we were all shocked to then see later on that day the videos of people scaling walls, anyone doing anything illegal, actually making it inside the building where they weren't supposed to be. Obviously, we know one woman was killed in this whole situation, Ashley Babbitt. But then for you to have anyone question what happened there that day, I find rather shocking. Not only did they question you, they locked you up. So, yeah. Brandon, what happened after that? How long were you imprisoned? Where did the story go from there? Because unfortunately, from what I recall you telling me before this interview, it didn't get much better.
No, that was just the beginning. So the FBI presented me with a search warrant. A team of agents came in and began stripping my apartment of cell phones, computers, laptops, cameras, hard drives, thumb drives, just about any electronic equipment and clothing. Meanwhile, 2 or 3 other agents put me in a black car and took me to jail. The moment that I got to jail, they, took my mugshot, made it into a bracelet, put it on my wrist, took me into a concrete stall, like a shower stall. I had to take off all of my clothes, stand there completely naked, while a stranger came and took my clothes away and came back and brought me an orange jumpsuit and a pair of brown underwear and a brown t-shirt. From there, they took me into a room called medical, and I'm wearing my orange jumpsuit and my mugshot bracelet, and a nurse guard came up to me and said, "You need to give me your arm." And I said, "Why?" And he had a syringe in his hand, and he told me that all new inmates in the jail system have to take a TB test. And with that, he took my arm and stuck a needle in it and injected a substance into my forearm. From there, they took me into a room called intake evaluation, where they asked me questions like, have you ever been in a gang? Do you have AIDS? Are you feeling suicidal? And if a fight breaks out in the jail, are you able to defend yourself? And now, literally like 2 hours before this, I was sleeping peacefully in my bed, and I was still like a normal person named Brandon Straka. And now I'm inmate number whatever in this orange jumpsuit and in this absolute cycle of lunacy. And from there, they took me up to a cell block. They put me in a cell, told me I'd be in 23-hour-a-day lockdown. I asked if I would be able to see a judge that day. They told me no. They said that there's a blizzard and that the courts are closed. They said they couldn't guarantee if I would see a judge that day. The next day, they said it could be next week before you see a judge. I don't know. And they shut the door. And I spent the next 2 days in a concrete room with a metal door and a vertical window about like this. And it was 2 days before somebody came back and opened the door and told me at that point that I had an attorney phone call. My attorney advised me that he had gotten a virtual hearing with a judge for me. And so that later that day, I had a virtual hearing with a judge. I stood there unshowered, unkempt in my orange jumpsuit, standing before a judge who said to me, "This is the case of the United States versus Brandon Straka." And he did order my release. So I was released after midnight on that day. And that's when I found out what my charges were, which were completely confusing to me. So the one was a felony of knowingly occupying restricted grounds. One was a misdemeanor of disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds. But the most confusing to me was a charge which was a felony impeding a police officer in the line of duty. And I said, "What the hell is this?" And I was told, in your video, there's a moment, it's about 6 seconds long, where one Capitol police officer comes to the door frame of the open doors of the Capitol. And when he gets there, now remember, this is happening about 35 feet in front of me, and my arms are above my head, holding my camera down like this. When he gets to the door frame of the Capitol, somebody grabs his plastic shield out of his hand. And a couple of people in the audience begin chanting, "Take it, take his shield." Well, the FBI says, "We know that's your voice. We know that was Brandon Straka encouraging the crowd to take the shield from the officer." So they charged me with a felony, saying that I said the words, take it," while the shield was being taken from the officer. Ultimately, the government ended up dropping the felony charges against me, and I pled guilty as a plea deal to one Class B misdemeanor charge of disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds. But as a condition of my plea deal, I had to sign a statement of facts that was written by the government, which says, I, Brandon Straka, went on the Capitol grounds knowing they were restricted. I know I wasn't allowed to be there. I witnessed an officer having his shield taken away from him. When I witnessed that, I began shouting, take it," to encourage the crowd to take the shield away from him. So as a condition of my plea deal, I've confessed to all of those things.
But you did none of those things, right?
I have confessed to doing them.
So here's the thing that I find really bothersome about all this. Obviously, we live in the United States of America, Brandon. And if you're a person that has a permit to be somewhere, regardless of then what happens and what transpires after, you're already there in a place where you're allowed to be, I can't imagine then going home and, as you said, just thinking things were normal because you didn't do anything wrong, and then waking up to be arrested, and you didn't know the whole time that you were in jail awaiting a call from an attorney why you were there. Did you have any idea?
Not only did I not know what I was charged with, and by the way, I'm not saying that they didn't tell me. They very well might have at some point told me what the charges were, but when you're going through that, there's so much information your brain is trying to process.
Sure.
I can tell you that while I spent those days in jail, I did not know or comprehend what my charges were. All I could remember hearing echoing in my head was that they said multiple felony charges. Now, this was 5 days after Joe Biden took over the office of presidency. The Democrats are now in full control of the federal government. I'm Brandon Straka, the moron who's running around trying to encourage everybody to leave the Democratic Party. And so I am thinking to myself, they're going to charge me with treason. They're going to charge me with terrorism. They're going to charge me with it. I truly, truly believed that I would never see freedom again. I started adding up in my head 10 years for this, 10 years for that, 20 years for this. And I started thinking, I'm going to be 90 years old before I'm allowed out of prison for the 8 minutes that I stood on the Capitol steps on January 6th. And I truly believed it. And I'm not trying to make this overly dark, but just in the interest of being honest, I have never had a thought of self-harm in my entire life. But the fear that I was enduring during those days, that I was sitting in that cell having no idea what was going to happen, became so intense at times that I really did consider just tying my bed sheet around my neck and just tying it to. Oh yeah, I mean, really, because it was a level of fear that actually was like manifesting physical pain. I was terrified to the point of like physical pain, and I just wanted the pain to stop. And I had no idea when anyone was going to open that door. I mean, I had no clue if I was going to be sitting there for 8 or 9 or 10 days before somebody would come open the door and tell me what was going on.
I mean, it's all of it is so upsetting. And unfortunately, Brandon, there are people out there who have been fed information by the mainstream media about what they claim happened on January 6th. By the way, I would love to know what actually happened on January 6th, because as someone, right, like as someone who was there that day with completely pure intentions, that never in a million years would have dreamed that any of the things that we saw happen that day would have happened, that was as horrified as the rest of the country when I then found out what happened. There are people out there, though, that represent you, that represent me, that represent anyone who happened to be there to support Donald Trump that day as basically a domestic terrorist, as an awful person. And I mean, what is that like for you? Because for me personally, look, I of course know that I haven't done anything wrong. Quite frankly, if Congress wants to read out loud every text message from me the day of January 6th, it will not only exonerate me, but our entire family. So have at it. Isn't it interesting? Nobody has done that yet. But how does that make you feel too? Because then there were all these stories written about you, and obviously none of them are true.
Right. Well, I mean, they're so egregious. So first of all, that this is the purpose of this entire thing, is headlines, by the way.
Right,
and
of course.
This is just my opinion, but I think that the Department of Justice, the current Department of Justice, is really working in tandem with the media. There's a reason why these narratives are being created and why people are being put in positions where they feel like the only option they really have is to take a plea deal. I mean, look, I hate to say it, but anybody who thinks that they're going to get a fair shot in front of a DC judge and a DC jury going to trial on these charges, I wish them the very best of luck. And I mean that sincerely, but that did not feel like a viable option to me, which put me in a position to say, whatever I have to swallow in my plea deal, that's what I have to do if I want to have any chance of moving forward from this in my life. And so, you know, those little almost pre-written sound bites that were put in there, I'm now going to have to live with for the rest of my life. You know, when I've been doing some really, even from home right now while I'm on house arrest, which is, we can get into that, but I've still been trying to do events. Well, I have been doing events, and I think I've been doing some really amazing work even from home. But the media that has covered the events that I've been doing from home, everything that they write now is Brandon Straka, who went to the Capitol on January 6th and encouraged an attack on a police officer, that's like now my legacy in the media, which is devastating. I mean, it's absolutely devastating to me. But through that, and again, I think that they know what they're doing. I think that they have made it an art form, knowing how to destroy people's lives and exactly what to allege and exactly which buttons to push.
Yes, you're talking to the right person with the right last name for that. Believe me.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so as fallout for my Class B nonviolent misdemeanor charge, I have been permanently banned from using PayPal, from using Venmo, from using Stripe, because it's been alleged that I am a domestic terrorist and I should not have the right to send and receive financial, funds electronically now. I've been banned from email services like MailChimp and Constant Contact. I have been placed on a TSA terrorism watch list. This is not a joke. Every single time that I travel now, I have a designation which is called SSSS, which means that I am allowed to fly, but I have to go through hours of screening at the airport. They take pictures of my boarding passes. They take pictures of my IDs. They have teams of TSA agents follow me around the airport. Sometimes they have dogs. They bring special machine to the gate. So as I'm boarding the flight with the other passengers, they give me a full body pat down. They put their hands down my pants, the front and the back. And then they take all the items out of my bag and swab them for explosive materials and test them at the gate. They swab my hands. They swab my feet. They do this in front of the other passengers who are now terrified to get on an airplane with me. This is over a Class B misdemeanor charge of disorderly conduct. I am now on a terrorism list. So yes, the ways in which this has devastated so many areas of my life, not to mention the headlines. I mean, Washington Post did an article 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the headline was MAGA supporter gets probation, basically saying, how dare I get probation, which I got a lot more than that. But they're saying he was trying to start a civil war. And the reason why they were able to create that headline is because the prosecutor in my sentencing hearing said, Mr. Straka was on Twitter telling his Twitter followers that we're in a civil war. And that could certainly be interpreted as him wanting his followers to go and engage in violence at the Capitol. And when in fact I was talking about a modern civil war, exactly the things I'm telling you, cutting people off from social media, cutting people off from being able to send and receive funds electronically. That's what a modern civil war looks like. I'm not telling any of my followers to go, grab a musket and hit the battlefield. I'm saying that the left is destroying us in the digital square. They have waged a civil war on conservatives. And I do believe that's true. But of course, the Washington Post turned that into a call for violence. And they got that from the prosecutor in the DOJ.
Well, the Washington Post is a very honest outlet, Brandon. So I can't imagine why they would take, something to such an extent. The idea that, first of all, I think one of the things that is so shocking to me about all of this, I mean, everything you've said here today has been shocking in and of itself. But then when you take a step back and actually look at January 6th, and you look at the fact that conservatives have been the most pro-police people, I mean, in America in the past, decade or so, certainly the past 5 years, since the summer of 2020 riots, conservatives have always talked about their support of police officers, and it has been folks on the left and in the media, quite frankly, who have called for defunding them, said that they're horrible people, are okay with attacks on police officers and those sorts of things. It's so incredible to me that now when it's convenient for them to support police all of a sudden, they're all on board because they think it makes Trump supporters look bad. I mean, I think all of it is just stunning to no end. But your story, it's really frightening because, I mean, quite frankly, you did nothing wrong that as far as what I've heard from your story here today, right? You had a right to be there. You didn't hurt anyone. You didn't call for violence against anyone. You left, you did some interviews. That was it. You posted it online. If you can do everything essentially right and still have what happened to you happen, I mean, what does that tell you about America? What is this? What are we living in right now? And do you feel like your rights were violated? Do you feel like America is operating in the way that our founding fathers saw it operating? Or where are we right now? What is this?
Here's the thing. My case could have been handled a million different ways that were different than the way it was handled. First of all, why didn't this begin with the FBI coming to my house, knocking on my door and saying, we'd like to ask you a few questions? Why couldn't they come into my house and say, let's look at your video. Is that your voice? What was your intention for going there? Did you know you weren't allowed to be on? Because this is the whole thing. And it's one area where I guess I need to correct you. So as it turns out, it is actually illegal to be on the steps of the Capitol during a protest or to be protesting on the steps of the Capitol. Every person I've spoken to so far, including Mark Levin, have said, I've never heard that in my life. Dinesh D'Souza, never heard this in there. This is something that is not common knowledge for people. I signed a confession that says I knew the grounds were restricted that I walked on when I went on the steps. I'm just saying that I think the majority of people don't know and don't understand that. But certainly my case could have begun with a peaceful sit down and some questions being asked, an opportunity to clear some things up. Is this your voice? Is this not your voice? What was your intention? Although I think that when we look at the number of riots that have happened in the last couple of years, and for instance, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots, where we know statistically that more than 90% of the people who were even charged, which was probably a small percentage of people who actually committed crimes, but of the people who were actually charged, more than 90% had their charges dropped entirely. Now, if someone said to me, look, we feel that it's appropriate to charge you with disorderly conduct. I might have looked at that and said, okay, I mean, if that's what you feel like you have to, and then I would have made a decision. Do I want to plead guilty to this, or do I want to go to trial on this disorderly conduct charge? I chose to plead guilty to disorderly conduct because I had been so overcharged with felonies that I was terrified. And I was terrified to go to a DC judge and a DC jury and roll the dice, but I would have considered pleading guilty to a disorderly conduct charge if it had been handled like any other case in the United States of a protest getting out of control has been handled. But I don't have a criminal record. I have no criminal record whatsoever. This is my first offense. It's a nonviolent charge. It's a misdemeanor, disorderly conduct, and it's Class B. There's 3 classes, which means they consider it a mid-level offense. The judge herself, in my case, referred to it as a petty offense misdemeanor. So for my first offense, petty offense misdemeanor, I was sentenced to 3 months of house arrest, 3 years of probation, the maximum fine of $5,000, $500 restitution to be paid to the Capitol, although it was acknowledged I didn't engage in any violence or destruction to the Capitol, 60 hours of community service, and this was after a year of pretrial supervision and 2 days in jail in 23-hour lockdown. This is for first offense Class B misdemeanor charge. And the government also requested, as a condition of my 3 years of probation, the government said, we want to have the right to surveil his phone, his computer, his email accounts, his social media accounts, and his bank accounts for 3 years. And the judge actually did not grant them that.
Well, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, Brandon, they were trying to make an example out of you?
100%. And not only do I feel that way, they haven't even been coy about saying that they were. I mean, both the prosecutor and everybody in court during my sentencing, the whole crux of their bringing the hammer down on me was Brandon Straka is the leader of the walkaway movement. Now, none of them bothered to research what it was. None of them bothered to go on YouTube, watch any videos, or maybe they already knew and they were being disingenuous. I don't know. But I can tell you that suddenly it was, what is this walkaway movement? And is this a violent organization? Is it, oh my God. Well, we better examine this thoroughly. So it was that I was the founder of the walkaway movement, and it was that I have almost 700,000 Twitter followers and almost 1 million followers altogether on social media. And that, I was calling for a civil war and I was encouraging violence through my words. And we have to make an example of an influencer who was misusing his platform. That was pretty much the crux of the whole thing that they were saying. And the other thing that I'll say too is I truly believe in my gut. I may never be able to prove it, but I know that I was one of the first people arrested. And when I was arrested, I was certainly the most high profile person who had been arrested, at least at that point, and probably still. And I believe that they were keeping me on the back burner as a possibility for a narrative if they didn't come up with anything else. As it turns out, they ended up coming up with their Proud Boys, Oath Keepers narrative, which I think they have felt like was much more valuable to them. But I truly believe that if they had never come up with that, they would have kept on the back burner that the walkaway movement was responsible for the violence of January 6th, and that the walkaway leader got this whole thing started. I believe that. And I think that when they found the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, they're like, oh, that's better. Let's go with that.
Wow. I mean, as a person who clearly loves this country, you were out there all over the country giving speeches and really encouraging people to open their eyes in America, to vote, to keep our country on the right track. And obviously you're a person, like I said, that loves America and loves this country. Has this changed that in any way for you?
No, not that part of it. There are things about this that have shaken me really badly. One is that it's shaken me very badly that I haven't heard from any Republicans in Congress. I find that to be terrifying. I've reached out to a couple, and a couple of them have taken my phone calls. But, I did so much for this country in the last 3.5 years. I truly believe that nobody worked harder to go out there and fight for the conservative movement, fight for the Republican Party. So I find that to be really astounding and hurtful. And also the media. I'm somebody who, before this happened, I had appeared on the Fox News network more than 75 times. I've done conservative cable news hundreds of times. And I'm kind of like, can anyone come forward and be like, this is a good guy? Something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And some people did. One that really stands out to me actually is Mike Huckabee, who I didn't even know it. Somebody had reached out to me and said that they had he does a mass emailing to all of his subscribers and followers. And one of his emails throughout the year was about me. And he just said, I'm reading about Brandon Straka, and he's been accused of this, and he's been accused of this, and they're saying he said this, and they're saying, and he just said, I want you guys to know I don't believe it. He was like, I've met Brandon several times. This does not sound like the guy that I know. And he's like, I don't believe it for a second.
Wow.
And it brought me to tears, and I wrote him a handwritten letter, and I just said, thank you so much. And he wrote me back, and he's like, I got you. And there's been some of that, but not enough. And
why do you think that is, Brandon?
Fear. I think that there's several different variables to it, depending on who it is. I mean, sadly, I think a lot of like the kind of blue check conservative social media influencers are afraid of standing up for me, because I think that they're like, well, I don't want to lose my Twitter account, or I don't want to lose my YouTube account, whatever. I think there's some of that. And then I think that our side lost control of the narrative of this story really fast. And I think that if we had stepped in at the beginning and again, this is not about exonerating people who committed violence or did bad things. I will be the first to admit it's not about that. And it never has been. But what this is about is that there are hundreds of people who walked through an open door. Some of them even claim and say they have videos of police officers going like this. Come on in, come on in. I don't know, but that's what's been alleged. There are people like myself who didn't even go inside the building. I was standing on the steps. And I just don't think that it's that controversial to be able to stand up and say, hey, how about we appropriately charge the people who committed acts of violence and destruction?
Absolutely.
But why don't we also slow our roll a little bit on labeling people as domestic terrorists and insurrectionists who were standing on steps holding a camera? But that's
the whole point, right? Because this, from the very beginning, was like the golden goose for the media and for the Democrats. They said, wait a minute. We know that they're just thirsty at all times to do anything they can to make Republicans and especially Trump supporters and Donald Trump look bad. So this whole incident happened. Nobody thought it was positive. We all wish it had never happened, but it did. And they took it and they ran with it in the media. They continue to run with it. They call it the insurrection. Well, if you look up the definition of an insurrection, that it isn't even what happened. Right. But nonetheless, it's about the narrative. It's about convincing people that if you join up with the Republican Party, if you join up with Donald Trump and his supporters, you're a bad person. Look what we did to this guy, Brandon Straka. Look how hard we made his life. This is a warning to everybody out there not to even think about speaking out and saying anything different, because you could be charged with, whatever it is, whatever they deem necessary, all in, the name of doing what is right and righteous and protecting people, which it's all so upsetting. I hope the truth comes out. But do you think, Brandon, are we going to ever find out ultimately what happened at the Capitol on January 6th?
Probably, but I think it'll be way too late. I mean, I think it's
like
kind of
30 years from now.
Right. I was going to say 7, 8, 10 years from now. Yes. And by the way, we could know by the end of the week. There are thousands of videos that have not been released. And by the way, just putting it out there, when I was standing on the steps of the Capitol, hundreds of people around me, every single one of them had a camera. So without a doubt, there are at minimum dozens of videos that show exactly who was saying what when I was on the Capitol steps, whose lips were moving when a police officer's shield was being taken away from him while I was there on the Capitol steps. magically, none of those videos have materialized. So, in my case, when it came time for sentencing and discovery was turned over, the only piece of discovery that they had was my video that I shot myself. There was not one other single bit of discovery that was given to us. That's interesting to me because every person around me had a camera. So, yeah, I think one day when the thousands of videos that they're holding on to that they won't release to the public are somehow finally seen and examined, I think we're going to find out a lot of really interesting things.
Well, I just want to say I'm not afraid to have you on my show. I'm not afraid to talk to you about these things. I think it's important, no matter who you are in America, no matter who you voted for, no matter what side of the aisle you fall on, to hear people's stories, to allow people to tell what happened to them. And, I think it's pretty clear from hearing your story that you were, wholly mistreated in so many different ways. We know that if the roles were reversed and you were still a Democrat and you had, burned down a police precinct in like Portland, Oregon, you probably would not have been treated this way. It was only because you were there in support of Republicans, Donald Trump, et cetera, that you were so severely charged and treated the way you were. But I hope that more people like you come out and speak out about what happened to them. I think as time goes on, we'll hear more stories like yours. I couldn't agree with you more. Anyone that did anything wrong obviously should be charged, but not just from January 6th, from any of the BLM and Antifa riots across the country over the past, several years. Anyone that commits a crime should always be charged, period. I don't care who you are.
And equally.
Equally. Exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah.
What has been the most eye-opening part of all of this for you?
I have to pick one thing.
I know. Well,
the first thing I guess that comes to mind is just how much power the United States government has, and that if you are somebody who ends up entangled in a trap or a web or whatever you want to call it. And that's how I feel, honestly. There are so many things that, you can play those sort of what if games, like what if I had arrived 5 minutes later, or what if I had stopped to take that phone call that came in that I didn't take, or, but it doesn't matter. It happened the way that it happened. And I ended up being entangled in this. And so did other people ended up being entangled in this. And what I guess I've learned is that it's this horrifying David versus Goliath thing. They have unlimited funds and unlimited resources. They don't care. This is a misdemeanor case. They don't care if they spend $5 million on my misdemeanor case.
Right.
There's a greater payoff for them. Again, it's the headlines. It's the political destruction that they're able to create. So I think to me, the most eye-opening thing is a bird's eye view that I never wanted of how our justice, or perhaps injustice, system actually works, and how much work has to be done to correct so much of this. And that is something that I want to be a part of going forward. Walkaway is going to continue. Nothing is going to change. We're not going to skip a beat. We haven't lost a step with Walkaway. We have so many amazing plans. But in addition to that, and in fact, I want to reach across the aisle to people on the left. I mean, people on the left have been saying for years and years and years, the prisons are filled with Black men who had to take plea deals who didn't do anything wrong, or people who had to confess to crimes that they didn't commit.
Right.
Great. Let's work together to fix that. I would love to work. I don't care if we don't agree on anything else. Let's work together to fix that.
Love it. Well, I love that you're not just laying down and rolling over and saying, you know what, I'm not going to fight for the country I love. I love that Walkaway will continue. I think it's an incredible movement. I think it's really opened so many people's eyes, and I hope continues to do that, because man, we've never needed that more than where we are right now in America. But you know what, Brandon, good luck with everything. I think you have a lot of people out there that have heard your story, will hear your story, and they're really going to be upset by what happened to you, because it really wasn't right. But thank you for being so willing to share it, so open with sharing it. And I do think it's an important thing, again, for people to hear what happened to you, because man, it's very, very scary. I think you're right. I think the reach of the United States government and the power that they hold, it's it could be a scary thing if you find yourself on the wrong side of that. So
Yes.
Good luck. Keep up the fight for the country. You got a lot of support out there. And, I look forward to the day, I'm sure as you do, to ultimately find out what happened on January 6th. But until then, you know what? We'll just we'll keep moving forward, and we'll keep doing what we think is right. And I think that's all we can do.
Exactly right. Thank you so much for having the conversation with me.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon Straka, we appreciate it. To everybody at home, as always, thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here next time for more of The Right View.